The information you're about to receive, to say the least, is very disturbing, very real, and above all, will prepare you for understanding some of the strange, newsworthy events that seem to be a daily occurrence, like Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, the rise in serial killings, mass suicide, and destructive religious cults, with the common denominator of tonight's topic, mind control. Our first speaker tonight is the co-author of the bestseller Transformation of America. Mark Phillips has appeared on over 400 radio and television productions. He writes for motion pictures and is respected authority worldwide within mental health circles on recovering survivors from this ultimate intrusion on our last remaining freedom, thought. Mark's presentation will include a history of mind control, his professional association with it, and how he rescued Cathy O'Brien from the mind control program, and she'll be our next speaker this evening. Immediately following Mark's presentation, Cathy O'Brien is the only vocal recovered survivor of the CIA's mind control project. Her validated life story is one you will never forget for as long as thoughts remain free. Mark and Cathy will answer your questions pertinent to this topic at the conclusion of Cathy's presentation. Only if they are written, no verbal questions, please. They support their work through the sale of their books, videos, and supportive information. So without further ado, I'm very proud to introduce, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee, Mr. Mark Phillips.
Well, good evening. And I'll get this mic close enough. I've got a bad habit. Hypnotherapists will either bore you to death or make you laugh. But their voices sometimes don't do well on video or audio. Cathy and I have had the luxury of only one thing, and that's meeting free thinkers, good people. All right? That's what I wanted to hear. I'm a little taller than most. I had the opportunity to meet some incredibly awake people. The people that are in this room tonight really represent a segment of society of what we call free thinkers. They're also part of that 5% that ultimately lead the 95% of our population. How many of you heard David Icke's presentation in this room? A good many of you did. David is one of those enlightened people who has a message that he not only delivers quite professionally and extraordinarily well, but it leaves an effect on people that actually opens up some neuron pathways in their brain, as a NASA scientist would call it. People are becoming more receptive and more discriminating of what they hear and see through the national news medias that are supposedly telling us the truth. The information that you're going to be getting tonight, needless to say, is pleasant. It's certainly not entertaining. We'll try to make it as palatable as humanly possible. This has taken some time, and you folks are in a wonderful position of being recipients of our information in a much more palatable form than we originally presented it. See, we spent about 5.5 years on a circuit educating law enforcement and mental health because we were certified to teach in a number of states in the United States. Psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health workers, policemen, and lawyers for their continuing education credits that are required for them to maintain their licenses. These are wonderful people. They're brilliant. Some of them are have the capacity for actually thinking for themselves. and looking beyond that which they were programmed in school and by their newspapers. But they are not the true, or they don't represent the true faction of the free thinkers that Cathy and I have, as I said, had the luxury of getting to know these past 2 years. Our book, Transformation of America, rivals any Stephen King novel for its horror. Much of the proof of the book is backed with what we had at the time, 27,000 evidences. Now these are photographs, these are pornographic films and still pictures. They are affidavits, letters from her users. They are hard proofs that could support us in any court of law. But we have been denied access to all litigation under the 1947 U.S. National Security Act for reasons of national security. The information you're going to hear tonight is the reason why they don't want us in court. They cannot legally stop us from having this book printed. They can't even sue us for the horrible, slanderous statements that we make about certain individuals. Certain individuals who, by the way, are quite recognized as litigants. They will sue anybody that opens their mouth about them, but they will not, because they cannot sue us. For the same law that protects their criminal activities also protects us from being stopped for reasons of national security. That's the reason we had to form our own publishing company. That's the reason Cathy and I are virtually an army of two. And that's the reason that these appearances that we make are greatly dependent upon people like Wes Mann and the Preferred Network to get the information out to those people who are free thinkers, who will take this information out of here tonight and not take it as the gospel, but instead begun researching what they heard, what you all heard tonight. There are a whole lot of ways to find out more about this topic. And believe it or not, it's not hidden in some archives in Ottawa or in Washington. It is available in your medical libraries and your public libraries if you know where to look. Now, I'm going to start out by, first of all, since I'm not really to be the focus of this seminar tonight, one more time I want to thank each and every one of you for being here from the bottom of my heart. Those of you who we know by correspondence, some of you are here, others are just new faces that we know, that we hope we will hear from you again. Our name and address for our personal address is in the book, Transformation. We'd like to sign a book for each and every one of you. We'd like for you to encourage others to read it, not to necessarily cause your friendship or your relationship with these people, because this information should be outside their realm of experience. I hope and I wish, and I would like to fantasize, that not one person in this room, which I happen to know better, has ever been affected by this terrible, terrible menace, this invisible menace that is plaguing society as we know it today. My credibility I will establish by giving you a thumbnail sketch of who I am and where I come from. But more importantly than that is the information that I'll impart to you through giving you a brief, very brief thumbnail history of what mind control is, and I'll try to cover as much as humanly possible in this short time that I have on this podium, because I want to turn it over to the person who has a message for you that each and every one of you need to know. The information that I'm going to supply you is only a roadmap. Cathy O'Brien and myself are what you would call whistleblowers. She was not actually employed by any government. I was. I worked for the United States government in the form of a Defense Department subcontractor during the 60s and 70s. That's a long time ago. But by the 60s and the 70s, mind control or external control of the mind through behavioral modification programs and emerging electronics and electronical devices for affecting the mind externally. Very important key, because I'm hoping at the end of Cathy's presentation, somebody in this audience begins to ask questions about, what about chips? I worked in that area. I am privileged with that knowledge. There's a whole lot I don't know. I'm one of the luckiest guys you've ever seen before you and in the history of this town, probably, because of who and what I worked with, and I remained unharmed. I'm also very fortunate that I had a very good life. Nothing compared to the trauma and abuse that Cathy O'Brien and so many others have suffered from. So you're looking at a privileged character. I was born in a family of means, and frankly, all my life I've been very successful in business. Even by the time I was 28, I was quite wealthy independently, without any nest egg to start with. I wanted to do it all on my own. I've enjoyed life very much. But now, since meeting Cathy O'Brien less than a decade ago, my life has changed a complete 360 degrees, or I should say 359. Mind control began long before I was born. I was born in 1943 in Nashville, Tennessee. My parents were the descendants of the people who founded the city. The state capitol hosts a bust of my great-great-grandfather. The land in which the prison is built upon, there in Nashville, was donated by my great-grandfather. I go back all the way as far as I can go, almost to the time that first one of my relatives landed and slept in a cave with the Indians. And that's not a joke, it really happened. No one in my family has ever served in the military, oddly enough. They did not buy their way out during the Revolution. They did not buy their way out during the Confederate War. It has just happened that no one has ever served in it. But when the Vietnam War was heating up in the 1960s, I was moving my draft board from state to state because they were drafting by states. And I had some inside information from a friend of mine whose father was a U.S. congressman, where to move it next. Because I thought that, well, this is a conflict and it's just going to go away. And I can continue my education and not be like my two friends who came back, one in a body bag and the other one without a mind. The one that came back without a mind was a brilliant young man who I cared a great deal for. And he did not recognize me. He was not suffering from what is known as post-traumatic stress disorder. He was suffering from something far more sinister. His wounds were not visible. They were internal, in his mind. I made up my mind at that point in time that I was not going to become a victim, and I began to research very quickly on how I could avoid the draft without coming to Canada and disgracing my blue-blooded family. I didn't want to do that particularly, although that was a very strong option because most of my friends had moved to Canada. The ones that had sense, that knew that this war was not one that was winnable. So I chose to look for a job, and I was offered an opportunity after applying at a number of different companies with a company known as the Ampex Corporation out of Redwood City, California. At that time, they employed about 30,000 people. They were an electronics manufacturer both for consumer electronics and for Defense Department, particularly in aviation electronics. They worked alongside with Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, the Rand Corporation, all of the normal military complex defense subcontractors. I was going to be working for the Ampex Corporation, but I was going to be wearing two hats, one visible, one invisible. They spent about 3 months of my my life, I was running out of money too, by the way, and patience, testing me. I was being tested psychologically. And these tests were occurring about every other day. I was not being paid for them until into the second month. At that point in time, they started paying me just to show up for the test. I was tested by psychiatrists and psychologists in 2 separate locations in the city of Atlanta, Georgia, where I was at that time residing. After about 3 months, and I understood there were well over 200 candidates for the job that I wanted, because everybody wanted to escape the draft. And they knew that working for the Defense Department would do that. I was selected for the position, that of an engineer. My friends, I can barely balance a checkbook. I don't even know what a slide rule does. I had benefit of a lot of education in other areas, but I had not a mathematical mind. So I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that they gave me this job as an engineer, except for the fact that I was an engineer in a most peculiar way. No one had to know I had to find out what an EE was, because everybody kept asking me, where'd you get your EE from? I didn't even know that that was a degree of electronic engineering. But with a little tutoring from my boss, he convinced me that I was going to have a wonderful opportunity to learn more about what all my testing showed, and that was mind-brain function, and that I had the capacity for being able to use both sides of my brain simultaneously. Now, most doctors, medical doctors, have that capacity. It's developed. It's taught to them in med school. All of us have the capacity to some degree. It is a genetic thing, and some people are literally born with it. I was obviously born with it, because I certainly hadn't had any academic affiliations that would have helped me understand that type of mind-brain function. You see, my mother had suffered a tragic head injury when I was a small child, and lost a little more than a third of her brain. And since it was in the lower brainstem area, it was her logic section on the left side of her head. So I was real interested in mind-brain function, because as a dutiful son, I would like to see my mother have her remaining days as a highly functional, normal person who didn't project everything in life through her emotions. And my father was a businessman. He worked very, very hard, but he's a chronic alcoholic, and his ability to communicate emotionally was zero. So here I had conflicting sides. One person who was totally lacking in emotions, and the other person who was totally lacking in logic. And it was a very confusing thing to me, so much so that I was labeled retarded until I was actually almost a preteen, because I could not speak. My brain would not help me vocalize. I could not speak a sound. I was stuttering so badly that my communication skills, I saw, were going to inevitably either cause me to have suicide because I couldn't function in society, or become a total recluse. So I began pursuing things that would help me be able to articulate, and I began memorizing dictionaries and this sort of thing, but also began using a mirror to form words. And I was shown a way of actually circumventing this stuttering problem that I had by a certain thought process. And in the process of learning how not to stutter, I also learned how to communicate with my own subconscious mind. I'm sure that most of you in this room, if I ask you individually, do you know about the fact that you have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, would agree with me. Well, there are some things that you need to know about those two minds that you have. One, your conscious mind is what you critically analyze with. It's what you think with. Your subconscious mind is where all the information is stored that you have decided to retain through critical analysis. And your subconscious mind is the smart one, except it has no ability to critically analyze. It's highly suggestible, and it will, in fact, be totally literal in nature. You see, our language, particularly the English language, is such that one word has many meanings. Languages are designed that way. Now, what I'm going to tell you in a moment about the history of mind control, you'll be able to refer back to that statement. After working with the Ampex Corporation for a while, I befriended a number of people. I was working in mental institutions, and I was working in prison systems, federal, state, some county. I was working in NASA facilities, and I was nothing more than a very well, high-paid suit gopher. All I did was stand there and wait until a particular file, film, or video was produced, or in some cases, dictation on an audio tape, and it went into a red bag, and I made sure, I was the guy that made sure that that bag made it to Fort George Meade, Maryland, and or other places like Cornell and the Sanford Research Institute. And these places were think tanks. They were developing what Adolf Hitler considered the ultimate weapon. You see, Adolf Hitler had a focus, and he had a passion, just like George Bush said. And Nero, he wanted a one-world order. Now, I'm not up here to talk about politics tonight. I'm not up here to talk about even personalities. And I would appreciate it if there's any personalities that you don't like in politics, you address Cathy with it. She's probably had experience with it. I remain neutral. I worked in a position where I saw there was no two-party system when I worked for the government. Because after leaving Ampex Corporation, I was recruited by a group of NASA scientists who were handed a piece of technology as a going-away retirement present that they would develop called telemetry. It was for measuring body functions and transmitting this information over short or long distances. So that I was under the impression that it was a spin-off of our work with astronauts, knowing what their heart rate was, their blood pressure, blah, 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 as they were being hurled through space at 25,000 miles per hour. Telemetry has, at that time, unlimited potential for benefiting mankind. As a matter of fact, I saw it only in a beneficial way. As a matter of fact, when I was around those mental institutions and the Yerkes Primate Center, which, by the way, is comprised of their patient load or their apes, and I worked also on Dinner Key, which won't show up on your Rand McNally maps, but if you look in some of your library maps, you'll find it. It's in Florida. It's called Dinner Key. It's a military secret installation that has done years and years and years of research on dolphins and some varieties of whales, all under the umbrella of an organizational name called MK Ultra. MK Ultra evolved from a project known as Project Bluebird, which our former president, Harry Truman, warned against. He said, pursuing this science will be the ultimate destruction of our planet through selective breeding and thought. He said, furthermore, the project that began in 1947, right after the National Security Act became law, was a project called Project Paperclip. The reason I mention it now is because after laser systems and electronics had developed some consumer-reliant projects and had done the necessary research and development on some projects for the Rand Corporation, Motorola, GE, and other companies that were developing microchips for implant purposes, not to control your minds, to know where you are. The mind control chips and the mind control efforts are efforts to surgically implant people so that they can control their behavior. Our Dr. Delgado in the late 60s discovered it was quite impressionable when he did his demonstration, which I have a video. If you write to me, I'll be happy to provide you a copy of it. Dr. Delgado, a Spanish psychiatrist, one that I refer to as a closet Nazi, a fascist scientist who was brought into our country under this Project Paperclip, had gone into a bull ring in Spain, Madrid. Here's this little petite scientist, bespectacled, typical Freudian beard, if I remember correctly. And he had this little black box with an antenna coming out of the top of it. And this huge, ugly bull comes out into the ring. Well, the bull, of course, is going to do what bulls do and charge anything that's standing in their way that moves. And the bull pawed the ground a few times and targeted Dr. Delgado, and was just beginning his charge when Dr. Delgado pushes a button on this little black box with this little pin, appeared to be an FM antenna. The bull stopped the charge and began grazing in the dust of that arena. This is pretty impressive. He made the bull forget what he was doing. He made the bull go back to a state of mind, if you will, that was primitive, food intake. What was he there for? Well, if you couldn't remember, it must be there to eat. So what if there was nothing to eat? The dust looked just fine, because in the bull's mind, he was seeing grass. Not that Dr. Delgado's instrument had implanted that thought. It's just that bulls are not real bright. There's a lot of misinformation floating around. And I'm sure there are those of you who wonder how in the world Cathy O'Brien and I are still alive if we're telling the truth about some of this stuff regarding the technologies. But let me give you a clue on something. Two things: we've never delivered the same presentation twice. We don't use cards. We don't use rehearsals. I have never rehearsed with her, ever, in all these years. And it is impossible, thank God, to repeat a lie if it becomes complex with details over and over again, because it will evolve and change. If you look at any of the 400, 500, 600 videos of Cathy and I that are floating around, you'll find that every single one of them have basically the same elements in them as far as information goes. And the details are there, but it will still be a very different presentation. This is impossible to do, whether you're a pro or him. It can only be done if you're telling the truth. Truth lives a wretched life, but it will always survive a lie. And we encourage each and every one of you to investigate that which we speak of tonight. Well, when Dr. Delgado gave his demonstration, it impressed very few people, because the purposes of mind control was for behavioral modification. And what I saw in the prison systems and at the NASA locations and at the Earth-Age primate centers was behavior that some of the folks had brain damage from automobile accidents, from any variety of things, or some of them were genetic defects. And I saw some incredible cures with drugs, hypnosis, electronics, primarily electronics. The stuff that I saw, I knew would revolutionize mental health, because it is the youngest of all the healing arts, and it is the one most lacking in information because of the two founders of it. And don't any one of you get nasty with me about Jung and Freud. But if you look at what they taught, and if any of you have gone to school and studied psychiatry from the psychological standpoint of it, you would be very, very amazed at how backward some of these therapy regimens or suggestions are. That's the reason that I belong to an organization called the International Society for the Study of Dissociation. This is a conglomeration of truth-seeking physicians. I'm one of the very few fellows that was invited early on into it that's not academically entitled to be there. You should be a psychiatrist. You should be a psychologist. You should be someone who has a base knowledge from which to work from, because they're interested in developing treatment modalities to recover people from what they now know and recognize and call mind control. Now, when we think of someone else controlling our mind, we think of how we can build resistance to it. Well, some of the information you're going to be given tonight is going to be very helpful. Most of the information as far as that part of our presentation is confined, because in our workshops we do vocal interactive. In our seminars we answer questions only written. There's a reason for that. We want everybody to have a chance. In workshops are smaller and they're much more intense. And those persons that attend our workshop tomorrow are people in this audience that want to know a lot more about mind control. They want to know a lot more about recovery, a lot more about protection from it. So tonight we're just going to enlighten you, those of you, with some information that's not only validatable, but unfortunately it's outside mainstream media. Canada is one of the best countries in the world left for uncensored news, and believe me, your news is censored heavily. But it still is the best. I have a satellite system where I live in the southern part of the United States that I focus on Canadian news only. I haven't seen U.S. news in a year. It's hogwash. I know exactly who produces it and why. Many of the top news people, investigators, are on our team. They are telling me what the truth is behind what's being reported. These are people working for UPI, United Press International. These are people working in positions of the military, in civilian capacity, working for many of the major newspaper chains like Gannett, which is USA Today, who, by the way, my father retired from. Information control, my friends, is a form of mind control. All of us, every single one of us, me included, is a victim of. Management of secrets is the key to information control and controlling the masses. I want to finish up my own history because I'd like very much to impart the rest of this story so that all of this begins to give you a clearer picture of what we're up against. And believe you me, I'm not a messenger of bad news that you're going to walk out of here depressed and say, oh my God, or let's go lynch one of those rascals. That's not the key. We've got to evolve, not revolt. And those of you in here, believe it or not, are going to lead 95% of the people, even when they shake their head and scuff their toes and say, well, if what you say is true, we're all doomed. Believe you me, their subconscious is filing the information, and they will react when the time is appropriate, and you'll probably never be thanked. This is not a thankless job. But it will ensure the fact that our species will survive, and it will ensure the fact that the offspring that you have and love so much will have a much better world in which to reside. After Laser Systems and Electronics did its little shooting star thing and the stock went across the counter and everybody got rich but me, but I did have a good deal. I'm not complaining. I was their director of marketing. I was their interface between certain functions of the State Department because we were exchanging a lot of information with other countries. I didn't even know there was a Cold War going on because it dealt with KGB in your country. And they made no bones about it. I did not work for the CIA at that time. I worked for a different branch of intelligence. At that point in time, I learned that if Canadian intelligence was so secret that they didn't even want the population to know the initials of the organization. I thought that rather odd, since everybody knows what the CIA was, except Mark Phillips. Because I was recruited by a company known as Capital International Airways. Considered at that point the world's largest supplemental. They were doing between $500 and $800 million a year, flying military airlift command flights and charter flights all over the world. We had 26 offices worldwide, and we were flying primarily large, at that time considered jumbo, these large DC-8 Stretches 63s. My experience was that of a very straight position. It wasn't until about 1990 that I was contacted by a Washington correspondent by the name of Linda Hunt, who had just completed a book that she had spent 10 years researching on a project that Harry Truman said that if it didn't stop in 1950, that by the year 2000, the world as he knew it would cease to exist. And there would be a group of strong elitists with the minds of a Nazi that would selectively decide who they were going to share the planet with. He said this project must stop. But you see, Capital International Airways, by the way, was born in 1947 as well. Most of their staff held extraordinarily high clearances within the government. My boss founded 2 CIA carriers, Air America, some of you have heard about, and also a U.S. Forestry Service, supposedly, airline called Evergreen, which is now Worldwide Shipping. And the rest of them had worked for other CIA infiltrated airlines, like Flying Tigers. I was the only non-airline person working there, but my shadow, as I prefer to call this fellow, who had more or less guided my career in all the right directions. He was a friend whom I never knew much about, except that he was always around at the right times. He told me about this job at Capital International Airways, and since I didn't like to see the surgeries that I was involved with, I did not want to go to work for the Rand Corporation or General Medical or any of the other medical companies that were in the business of manufacturing or perpetuating the manufacturing of these telemetry products, one of which is very common now. The company called Laser Systems more or less defined the science and invented it for heart monitoring telemetry, so that the patient who had just suffered a heart attack won't be re-traumatized moment to moment psychologically by being strapped in a bed with wires going into his or her chest. The person could walk around and feel good about themselves, and the mind seemed to make the person heal faster. So when I saw all these things, I saw nothing but benevolency. I saw a government that was developing through the finest minds and the finest think tanks on the face of the earth technologies that would inevitably advance mankind's happiness and welfare. I was also acutely aware that this same technology, like David Icke so eloquently says, information is neither good nor bad. It's who uses it for what purpose. I did not see the bad purposes until the very tail end of my career with the community, as they call it. And then I began to see a couple of things that encouraged me to pursue private enterprise, because I found out when I was working for Capital International Airways, my friends, some of them with U.S. Marshals, some of them with Treasury Department, a lot of them had gone to various departments of the government, came to me and said, Mark, you work at the CIA. I said, I'm working for Capital International Airways. I'm sure they, like everybody else, is doing something for the CIA. Everybody does. He said, no, you are working for the CIA. I strongly recommend you get away from it. So I did. I went to Alaska with the president. The capital was sold after 51 years of operation. They were sold to a group of Saudi Arabians. And I went to work with a Russian fellow by the name of George Kamatz. We formed an airline in Alaska, and we flew over Wien Air Alaska's routes. And unbeknownst to me, we were literally responsible for destroying the natives up on the North Slope so that the United States government, working in tandem with the oil companies, could steal their birthright, their natural resources right up under their feet by literally poisoning them through everything from vaccinations for tuberculosis to the introduction of drugs and alcohol. You could buy cocaine on the North Slope cheaper than you could on the streets of Colombia. I was unaware that this activity was actually being conducted with the airline in which I was a vice president. I was in charge of sales and marketing, travel and tourism. I was named by Donna Tuttle, who during the 70s was the undersecretary of travel and tourism, as an ambassador worldwide. It gave me enormous contacts within the State Department. It gave me enormous latitude to name my ticket, whatever I wanted to do. I liked the travel and tourism business, and I enjoyed writing subliminal ads. I liked the idea of slicking folks into doing things that were fun for themselves and helping them deal with stress. I didn't feel like that by writing subliminal advertising and conveying a message to people's subconscious to do things that they wouldn't normally do, that would be healthy for them, whether there was anything wrong with it. The only thing wrong with it was that the people didn't know what I was doing. I was blindsided to it. I wish now everybody knew about subliminal advertising. Some of you all in here are looking into it. There's very little printed about it. The whole technique is quite simple. And tomorrow we'll be getting into a number of areas in which I'll show you how to see it. And when you see an advertisement, you'll see it in a whole new light. And it's almost fun. Almost. My tenure with Capital International Airways leading into Great Northern Airlines led me to believe that the only way I was going to get away from the company was to go into business for myself. So I did. Got into the antique trading business. I got into hat manufacturing business. Matter of fact, I lived in your country for a short period of time in Calgary, Alberta. I also stayed up in Yellowknife for a while with a few old retired spooks that I know. Spooks are people from intelligence. I found this country to be absolutely delightful. I love the people. I like their attitude, but it disheartened me back in those days even, and that was in the 80s, that the folks were not really awake. So I chose to go back to my hometown of Tennessee, where so much had been written about me publicly in the newspapers, and I got an opportunity, matter of fact, several of them, to put big companies or little companies together to form big companies, joint venture corporations. And one fellow came along, who was a country music entertainer by the name of Alex Houston, who's a ventriloquist, stage hypnotist, kind of a nobody, MC, that had apparently saved a lot of money, a lot of money. And he wanted someone to help him form a joint venture company with China. Well, I told him, here's the way I operate. And yes, I will draw up a marketing plan, business plan, and I will present it. But in order for me to do this, there has to be one of two things happen. There has to be a whole lot of money up front, or I have to be president of the company. Then I'll get my money on the back end. But I have to be in control. So he agreed, with no reluctancy, to allow me to become president of a corporation called Uniphase. And we've developed a product manufacturing company making these great big capacitor systems for reducing the electrical bills and electrical consumption for China's, one of their leading wannabe exports in the mining industry, where they were having to lose production every other day. They were shutting their mines down because they lack power. This would help. And the ministry, particularly the military, who owns, by the way, anything dealing with metal in China, and they own the mining industry, was becoming increasingly aware that technology could definitely pull them out of the hole, and they did not want to be owned by the rest of the Western world. They wanted to keep their balance of trade equal, because they had opened those proverbial bamboo doors, or curtains, as they call them, and they wanted to be an equal trade partner. But since they were not a real consumer-oriented society, they were more interested, and they did not want their people to become capitalists. They were more interested in some of the technologies. And in order to get some of the technologies, they were going to have to trade some natural resources. In order to trade a natural resource, they had to get darn things out of the ground. So we formed a very successful business corporation. Their initial order to the business was $31 million. They paid me a little over $1 million for my work in setting the two companies together. I had a Hong Kong liaison, business partner, who to this day I hold in extraordinary regard. And this is kind of an enigma, but he was an arms dealer. Matter of fact, he owned a ship line that did nothing but ship silkworm missiles all over the world. Matter of fact, while he and I were working together one day, one of his ships got blown up by U.S. ships while I was in China. Most embarrassing. But the Chinese were very concerned about a partner I had named Alex Houston, the fellow that introduced me to the whole concept and the fellow that was my silent partner in Tennessee. They showed me a file on myself depicting my entire relationship with the intelligence community, even personal data about me when I was in grade school. And in my entire life, they had in written form. Most of it was translated in English. And I saw some original documents in there, and I've said that on television, and I'll say it, and I've said it before Congress. And I'm very disturbed. There was a breach of national security. Because what was the communist country doing with my file? I thought I was being set up. That was not to be the case. They were more interested in telling me about a fellow by the name of Alex Houston, my partner, because he was involved in drug trafficking, child and adult prostitution, which is punishable by death in China, pornography, which is also punishable by death in China. And he was also involved in drug money, and drug laundering, drug distribution, and the biggest kicker was it was of the White House. Well, this would be just about like me trying to convince you all that I landed in a flying saucer before I came in here. And you all do believe that. We need to talk later. West man drives like he thinks he's in a flying saucer. But he didn't drive us tonight, thank God. Excuse me, Wes. The information that I was shown, including pictures of Alex Houston having sex with a small child and an expression on the child's face, since I had never been exposed to pedophilia, I'd never even seen that kind of pornography, kind of was a setback trauma thing. And I said, what do you want me to do? They said, get rid of it. I said, well, in spite of what you've seen on Western television, particularly the Westerns, I think what you're insinuating I can't do. He said, wait, what? He said, what is that? I said, kill him. He said, no, we never suggested that. I said, well, that was my first feeling after seeing those pictures and seeing the documentation to back up what you're saying. He said, no, we just want you to buy him out. I said, well, wait just a minute, fellas. You've only signed the contract. The letter of credit for me to draw my 1.1, some on top. It was about 1.2 million out of which I had about 900,000 was old Uncle Mark's money. But you see, when you join these companies together, you put up a lot of money. It takes a lot of money, a lot of payoffs, a lot of legal work. And I funded that stuff, a lot of it. Alex usually funded a lot of it. So he was going to get his money and I was going to get mine, or at least a big chunk of it back. By the way, Alex Houston's choice of banks was not the choice of the Chinese. Alex insisted we put it in the Bank of Credit and Commerce in New York. I preferred to put it in a different bank. But since I was going to draw it out pretty quick, I didn't really care. I was going to move it to another bank. BCCI, anybody know who they are? Well, there was a world scandal. They were the CIA's drug laundering bank, and they cost the world literally tens of billions of dollars in monies that decent people had invested using their banks that were scattered all over the world. Well, I determined that I needed to get Cathy O'Brien and her, at that time, 8-year-old daughter out of the grasp of this character after I had researched with some of my friends in the intelligence community, most of them retired, and some military people that were retired, holding the rank as high as general. And I was informed that this mind control stuff that I had been exposed to in the 60s and 70s was fully operational. Well, it was operational then, but only on an espionage basis and only on an espionage basis. They said it's fully operational and it is crawling through the private sector because of the CIA's alliances with the mafia, the mob, as my friends call it. That they've taken over the drug business to fund their black budget operations so that they could covertly, literally, control the world. And I said, why on earth would anybody want to control the world? You got all these mixed cultures and all these different ideas. They said because communications are changing. We are becoming a global economy. Whether we like the idea of a one world order, and they didn't use that word, whether we like the idea of a global union, I think is actually the word that was used, and the potential for having one omnipotent leader, it's upon us, it's happening, and we've got to evolve through it. And there's no stopping it. Adolf Hitler was researching what I would see when in 1988, February the 8th, 1988, I rescued Cathy O'Brien and her 8-year-old daughter from this invisible grip of the CIA. Through my associations and through fortunately having some money that the feds hadn't found, and they took 95% of what I had. And through some extraordinary support, because this is a psychological thing. They, my friends, some known and unknown to me, guided Cathy and I to the safety and serenity of the wilds of Alaska, where I spent 9 months working with her, being hand-fed a therapy method that would enable me to help her recover from the most horrific abuse that I didn't know human beings could withstand that much abuse. But Adolf Hitler did, because in the 1930s, he decided he was not going to dedicate the dwindling resources of Germany to developing a weapon of mass destruction known as the atom bomb. He was much more interested in being able to control the minds of the masses. And in order to control the minds of the masses and have one person leading all of it, he envisioned himself as the puppet master. So he assigned Goebbels to be his what we call spin doctors today. He's propagandists to convey messages of all is well with the world. We are the richest nation on earth. We're the smartest people on earth. Blah, 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 blah. He even used music. He used everything. Goebel was a genius. Did a fantastic job of manipulating the minds of the masses. And the churches, oh boy, the church leaders just lined up to support Hitler. They just thought this is wonderful. We've seen the same thing with some leadership in Canada that was corrupt. We've seen the same thing happen in other countries, in my country particularly, with people like George Bush and many others. Adolf Hitler assigned his right-hand man to do something what Adolf Hitler considered the most secret of all of the technologies. And we hear about all this German technology of inventing space machines that Hitler could zip back and forth to Uranus and back. That's another joke. I can't tell. But all aside, he was developing control because he did not want to destroy the globe with nuclear technology. He just wanted the people under his domain. So he assigned Heinrich Himmler to research the background and the families of what were then and now known as multi-generational abuse families, particularly the ones involved in occultic religions. Now, occultic has a very different meaning to a lot of people. It also means things unknown to science. You see, religion picks up where science leaves off. Superstition takes over where science leaves off. That's how we as humans fill in the gaps. Well, Heinrich Himmler began to discover some things that were perhaps the most exciting discoveries that he could ever even begin to imagine to take back to his boss, Adolf. He found that some of the children of these multi-generationally abused families, where the fathers were sexually and psychologically and physically abusing these children ritually, using blood ritual traumas. Some call it Satanism. There were a whole variety of what I call non-vanilla religions floating around in Northern Europe at the time. But many of them incorporated the same elements, like blood traumas, like sexual abuse from birth, like near death on a fairly regular basis, and by using certain language techniques in which to control these individuals, so that not only did they not have a memory of the abuse, but they developed what is now called the Stockholm Syndrome. They loved their abusers. Remember Patty Hearst? Poor Patty Hearst goes to jail for robbing a bank after she was kidnapped. And people were wondering, how could this happen? She developed what's called Stockholm Syndrome. She was locked in the closet, hardly abused, until she finally began to sympathize with her abusers and became one of them. It's a type of brainwashing. If you think Patty Hearst is simple-minded, you're sadly mistaken. She's not a genius, just an average person. But she was brainwashed. Any of us can be brainwashed if we don't know the components of it. But that's ancient technology. So ancient, in fact, that Heinrich Himmler told Hitler, he said, this technology is so old that most of the Northern Europeans refined it at the turn of the century when the pyramids were being excavated, because in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it gives a complete formula for external control of the mind. And you all can buy a copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Most any major city has them. All libraries have them. The formula for external control, absolute robotic control of the mind is written in that text. Adolf Hitler, he said, okay, Goebbels taking care of lulling the populace to sleep, making them think that everything's cool, no problems, that we're not anything except doing exactly what they want us to do. And everything that we do militarily, they'll think it's their idea, that they're protecting us. And he proceeded then to say, some of these children that were considered chosen ones of these families that had been so horribly abused had developed some extraordinary physical and psychological abilities. They had photographic memories. Photographic memories. Something we all would love to have. They had 44 times, in most cases, visual acuity improvement. That's practically like having eyes in the back of your head. So Hitler thought, wow, special forces. I can use this. I have the most elite fighting force on earth. But more than anything else, these people could be given suggestions, or sometimes called as programs, under the influence of hypnosis and certain drug compounds. And these programs could be triggered out into action by any established means of triggers. Just like a computer, when you access a program, you've got to know how to get past or get into your computer through a code, a set of codes. Well, there are also a set of codes used triggers in which to access someone's memory of a certain event that has been compartmentalized due to trauma or due to drugs. Adolf Hitler was a very brilliant sociopath. Sociopath makes the best leaders because they seem so dynamic, so believable, and so utterly focused. But what you see is not what you're getting. And so it is with society today. MK Ultra evolved, and I always said, Germany didn't lose war. They just moved the guys that were organizing it over the United States and Canada. Had it not been for one brave individual in Canada who had the political clout to go up against the United States government, most of what I'm going to be telling you and most of what we have in those packets back there as far as Freedom of Information Act documentation would not exist. Because in 1976, a Senator Frank Church from the United States began investigating the CIA's abuses of certain individuals based on reports he was getting from a politician in Canada about a particular hospital by a particular fellow by the name of Ewing Cameron, who unfortunately was the founder of the American Psychiatric Association, who was a CIA officer and an operative and working for the government. Whether he was working for your government is still a matter of contention, but he was working for the CIA. This man was literally torturing people who walked through the front door of a facility, mental health facility in Montreal, who hadn't been preconditioned at birth, who were coming in there for things like simple depression or some sort of chemical imbalance in their brain, normal stuff for you to go see a psychiatrist for and be treated, and they were coming out as vegetables, or people severely damaged as far as their ability to project who they were. They were suffering from dissociative disorders. In other words, amnestic blocks. Well, the whole thing was brought to task, and in 1977, the 95th U.S. Congress met, and the CIA, in typical fashion, never admitted any wrongdoing, but did finally offer some pittance of compensation to the families and some of the survivors of these hideous experiments done in Canada. The Central Intelligence Agency at that time was well out of control because they were threatened in the early 60s by a president. That president was immediately assassinated. His name was John Kennedy. It is well known among the people who think conspiracies don't even exist. And by the way, the government prosecutes more people for conspiracy than anything else, and then they say, don't believe in conspiracy stuff. We're not talking about conspiracy here, folks. We're talking about a criminal organization. It's wide open. The streets in my country are flooded with drugs. Our television, our motion pictures are flooded with misinformation, trauma. They're desensitizing the population and have been for several generations so that we will accept this new world order, this United Nations, this effort to protect us and what's left or of remnants of our families or our personal possessions. They're destabilizing us through what is known as psychological warfare. We are all victims of it. But going back to Hitler's idea with taking some of these chosen ones, the children of these multi-generationally abused families who had some of these extraordinary talents, he was going to educate them in the finest schools all over the world. He was also going to place them in positions of extreme power, like the president and prime minister of each and every region or country. And he would be invisibly pulling their strings. One man would be in control of the world. That was his fantasy. That fantasy was nothing than Nero had the fantasy. Lots of folks have had it. And thank goodness at the very end, something dreadful happens and the whole thing goes. But all the good people, they got caught up in while this evil was being perpetuated, right under the noses of good people like you and me and everybody else. We don't see anything until we wake up. Has reached proportions where there are actually people in positions of authority that are beginning to do something. The rich folks are getting burned. They're getting mad. When the rich folks like the DuPonts get mad, this is good. This is good. When whistleblowers working for the government find that they actually do have a spine, and they actually find out if they'll keep their mouth shut about harassment and not get out there for some badge of courage and say, well, here's what the government's done to me just so I could be here tonight. If anybody gets up in front of you all and tells you that, you're probably getting a lot of misinformation, or you're getting somebody with a tremendous ego, or you're getting somebody who works for the government, most likely. Because if you are a whistleblower, the first lesson you know is keep your mouth shut only about arrests. Because if it don't work, they don't do it. And it doesn't work unless the people perpetuate it by intimidating other people so they won't become whistleblowers. I'm going to tell you quite honestly that we don't have any problems. It's not because we're misinformation officers. And it's not because I'm oblivious. It's because in the beginning, when they harassed the living hell out of us, I refused to talk about it. Some whistleblowers say they can't stand it anymore, so they wind up in prisons to destroy their own credibility. There's a lot of very honest people with a lot of integrity who are locked up on bogus charges or sometimes deliberate criminal acts just so they can have the safety of having their credibility destroyed because they think they can blow the whistle from the inside. People don't believe them. I have a hard time believing anybody in prison. I have a real hard time. Because I know ways of keeping out of the joint and actually getting information into the people's heads without getting myself killed. Cathy O'Brien and I have been doing this for long enough to where now the bad guys' window of opportunity is pretty much closed. If I die natural causes, there's not very many people in this room would believe it. There's not very many people in the United States that you could even begin to convince. I have received not death threats from the bad guys. I have received demands that I quit riding my motorcycles, that I quit fooling around with experimental aircraft, and I stop smoking immediately. They're actually worried about my health. I think that's so considerate. Since what they did to Cathy O'Brien and her daughter, who is literally a political prisoner, goes beyond the imagination of even that of Adolf Hitler. Child abuse is rampant around the world. Rampant. If I ask, which I of course do, but if I ask the people to raise their hands in this audience that were abused sexually as a child by an adult, the numbers would scare the living heck out of those that weren't. And a lot of the people that don't hold up their hands didn't even know it was sexual abuse. They thought it was affection. And so they wouldn't even identify it that way. The point is, sexual abuse in itself has a profound effect on human psyche. But when you destroy one's ego or their perception of themselves, who they are, you have stripped them of their free will, their ability to critically analyze, or that part of their brain that helps them make rational, logical decisions is literally put on hold. No, I do not harbor the belief that these characters, creeps, whatever you want to call them, are stealing your soul. As a matter of fact, soul literally takes flight, as I perceive it, and as most theologians perceive it. It actually takes flight from the body when the body is being just literally desecrated. I didn't find that Cathy O'Brien's soul had been touched. And believe you me, after working with all of these clients who've been abused by various military operations, these are legitimate survivors who are institutionalized in mental hospitals all over the world where we travel. And when I interface with them and work with them and train the doctors on really what not to do, like, how does that make you feel? The patients taught me something. They're people. And some of them recovered are some of the biggest jerks you ever knew in your life. They would have been jerks anyway. The poor things just had been abused under my control. That jerk part of their personality, I believe, is relative to their soul or to their soul expression. I hope it's soul expression. But once they're given free will, they're not very nice people, some of them. Some of them are like Cathy O'Brien, who I'm very prejudiced towards. I think probably is as close to being perfect as anybody I've ever met. But she is an individual. She has free thought. She and I are together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm a very reclusive person. I was hired by the government because I could keep a secret. I was also hired by the government because I stayed to myself. This is totally alien to my personality to be out here in front of you people telling secrets that I was sworn to protect. and that I felt at that time I had an obligation to humanity for it to be released through our medical academia in a way in which doctors could evolve slowly instead of this information all coming out one time being piled on. But this operation that I belong to, called the International Society for the Study of Dissociation, is a group of doctors who are, for the most part, very concerned on helping these people recover. Because in 1980, there were 200 cases that had been diagnosed of this disorder worldwide throughout history. In 1990, there were 250,000 in the United States and Canada. By 1995, 2.5 million people had been diagnosed. And it is roughly estimated by both the American Psychiatric and American Psychological Association and the Canadian Psychological Associations that represents 1 out of 11 people walking around. This is a frightening statistic. It's one that you need to know about, and it's one that we hope that we can impart as much information while we're in your area today and tomorrow. So at this point, without further ado, I would like to introduce a person who has truly survived hell, a person who I respect, and a person whom I believe you'll find to be as normal as whatever normal means. But more than that, a person who is connected with her spirituality and the person who rescued me, Cathy O'Brien.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here tonight to arm yourselves with knowledge about a tool, a little known invisible tool that is being covertly used to usher in what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed New World Order. And that's mind control. I want to thank Wes Mann for bringing Mark and I out here to give us this opportunity to enlighten all of you to this information that's been suppressed for far too long. The information on mind control is truth that you have a right to know and a need to know. Because knowledge is our only defense against mind control. These criminals that are in control of our country and in control of our world operate on the philosophy that secret knowledge equals power. By telling their secrets, their power is eroding. I know that I'm extremely fortunate to have survived my MK Ultra mind control victimization. To reach this point in telling what I witnessed behind the scenes of this New World Order effort. As a White House, Pentagon level, CIA mind controlled slave, I was totally robotic. I had no capacity for free thought. I had no conscious awareness whatsoever and was actually functioning on a subconscious level. And on a subconscious level, the subconscious mind has no ability to reason, to question, or to comprehend. The subconscious mind just readily accepts information. And I was totally robotic, forced to carry out criminal covert operations that were absolutely, totally against my will. But under mind control, I learned that without free thought, there's no free will. And without that God-given free will, there's no soul expression. It wasn't until Mark rescued my daughter Kelly and I in 1988. And I went through his expert and loving deprogramming process and regained control of my mind and my memories once again. That I was able to remember all those secrets that I was supposed to forget. Our good friend David Icke wisely stated that knowledge is neither good nor bad. It's who has control of the information that makes the difference. And the information on mind control can be used for good because what they know about how our brains work, how the mind-brain function actually occurs, and what all the components of our thinking processes are. When good people have that information, I am really excited at the prospect of the evolvement, the giant leap of evolvement that humanity is going to experience. Because when we consider the fact that we only use 10% of our brain, what does the rest of our brain hold? What possibilities are there for us? Those criminals who are manipulating all of us have insightful information pertaining to how the mind-brain function works in absolute detail. And once we have that information and use it for good, I don't think we're going to even need doctors anymore. The healing capacities of the brain, the power of the mind is so strong that the possibilities are very exciting for what can happen for all of us once we have this information. But so far, this information has been suppressed from all of us. It's been suppressed through the mental health communities. It's been suppressed by the government. The government I'm referring to are the New World Order elite, those who are hell-bent on world domination through mind control of the masses. They have kept this information up from us so that they can manipulate us all. It's time that the moral majority of the United States, Canada, and the world had this information. I feel so fortunate to have survived to reach this point. And now that I'm in control of my own mind and have free will, it's my choice to provide you with the facts of exactly what mind control entails. Because once you have the understanding of the components of mind control, then you will be armed against it. It's as though there's an evolution in the brain, and that awareness of exactly what you're supposed to watch out for is in place. You're able to protect yourself against mind manipulation of all forms. My trauma-based, mind-controlled, total, absolute robotic victimization was extreme. And although the information is horrific, it's certainly no more horrific than what we see happening in society today. There's turmoil globally as people are beginning to wake up from the controls that they've been under for so long. The details in our book, Transformation of America, have been provided so that you can have the details and the information that you have a right to know. The names that I named in Transformation of America have been named not so I can say that, oh, I had sex with so-and-so at the White House or whatever. That's not the point. The point is giving you the names so that you know who these criminals are, so that we can all be far more effective in our ongoing effort to take back our respective countries and to take back our world. There certainly wasn't any glamour to my White House Pentagon level victimization. I missed the glamour part. The trauma-based mind control that I was exposed to did not allow for any of that. If the information is provided and the details that are in there are in themselves evidence, because the details provide you with insight into mind control and insight to this new world order mechanism that's controlling us all. I'd like to provide an understanding of mind control tonight predicated on my experience. Even though my experience was extreme, there's certainly a sliding scale to mind control that will apply to everyone from all walks of life. From the kind of mind manipulation that we get through our controlled medias, to the mind control, the low-level mind control that's going on with backwoods witchcraft that's proliferating, the Satanism, occultism that's proliferating worldwide. Military, intelligence, paramilitary, mercenary type operations, special forces operations, all the way to kind that's using espionage and the kind that I was exposed to as a CIA mind control slave. I was born in 1957 in Muskegon, Michigan, to a multi-generational incest-based family. My father had been sexually abused as a child, my mother had been sexually abused as a child, and they were sexually abusing me. The fact that I had been so horribly abused as far back as I can remember, and I have heard my father often brag that he was substituting his penis for my mother's nipple while I was still an infant, which confused my sexuality and put it into an area of my brain that was akin to survival. It was like breathing and eating to me. And even though I couldn't comprehend that what my father was doing was morally wrong, I experienced the pain and the suffocation of his abuse just the same. As a result, I suffered from what's known today as dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder was formerly termed multiple personality disorder, but I'm so glad they changed the name because that is not an accurate description of what dissociative identity disorder is. I didn't have multiple personalities. In fact, I had less than one, because the personality that I would have developed was absolutely shattered before I had a chance to become myself. Dissociative identity disorder is professionally defined as the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. It's termed the mind's sane defense because what actually happens is there's a compartmentalization of memory that occurs within the brain, where the neuron pathways actually physically shut down and compartmentalize in a little area of the brain memory of that traumatic event, so that the rest of the mind can function normally as though nothing had happened. This is what makes dissociative identity disorder difficult to identify and makes mind control difficult to see. It's an invisible menace that's been unleashed on our society by a handful of criminals, just a small handful. And it's inexcusable that good people allow this small handful of criminals to continue their reign of terror and reign of power on all of us. This criminal faction of government, this criminal faction in control of the U.S. government, was very much interested in targeting children like myself who suffered from dissociative identity disorder for absolute mind control, because they considered that this compartmentalization of memory would be ideal for compartmentalizing government secrets. And behind these amnesic barriers of this compartmentalized memory is a photographic memory, because it's a natural process and a natural function of the brain to photographically record events surrounding trauma. Therefore, they knew that behind the amnesic barriers, messages, certain orders would be photographically recalled when accessed. Additionally, when a person suffers from dissociative identity disorder, they develop 44 times visual acuity. 44 times visual acuity is what often creates that wide-eyed look of people that have been so horribly traumatized. It's as though they have eyes in the back of their head and they're trying to absorb everything from all around them so that they can see that horrible trauma before it happens and somehow defend themselves against it. This 44 times visual acuity means that they can see 44 times better than the average person. This was certainly targeted for mercenary and paramilitary operations, military intelligence, and espionage, because when a person has that kind of pinpoint vision, they'd be far more likely to hit their targets when they're shooting. Additionally, compartmentalized memory. If memory is being compartmentalized into different areas of the brain and a person's functioning through this compartmentalized memory, they don't remember what happened before. And therefore, they don't know to be tired. They don't know to be worn out. They don't know to be exhausted. And therefore, they feel just as fresh as if they hadn't done anything yet. So physical endurance is increased dramatically with dissociative identity disorder. My father had a 6th grade education and was earning his living as a worm digger, and supplemented the family income with child pornography that he was making of me and distributing it through the local Michigan Mafia child pornography ring. Now, these criminal politicians that were interested in New World Order controls through mind control of the masses were looking for children like myself within the child pornography ring, because any child that was subjected to child pornography would be so horribly traumatized that they would be suffering from dissociative identity disorder. Therefore, they actually sanctioned this criminal operation so that they could target children like myself. That's how I became a chosen one, or a prime candidate for the CIA's MKUltra mind control project. My father was caught sending child pornography, a bestiality film of me and my Uncle Sam's dog Buster, through the U.S. mails. This perverse film was confiscated. And my father was approached. I was just 6 years old at the time. And my father was approached and told that he could receive immunity from prosecution if he would agree to sell me into the project. Of course my father agreed. Not only that, but he was so excited because he felt like the government actually condoned child abuse, that the government actually condoned incest. So much so that he went on to have 5 more children to raise in the project. There were 7 of us in all. My brothers and sisters are far less fortunate than I am. Because under MKUltra mind control, there's no capacity to even think to escape. It takes someone with the fortitude and the intelligence of Mark Phillips to come in and rescue them. They're waiting for the day that people wake up to the reality of mind control and stop not only their abuse, but the abuse of so many other mind control survivors that are out there. They remain to date under my father's control. Once my father agreed to sell me into this MKUltra project, the local Michigan politician who was actually sanctioning the criminal activity of this child pornography ring came to my father and explained to him how to raise me according to government specifications. This politician was Gerald Ford. This is the same Gerald Ford that went on to become the first unelected president of the United States. This is the same Gerald Ford that headed the Warren Commission that covered up the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Gerald Ford explained to my father the components of mind control, the severe psychological and physical traumas that I was exposed to caused my conscious mind to take flight, leaving my subconscious mind open to manipulation, which when combined with a regimen of sleep, food and water deprivation left my mind wide open to their controls. One of the first things that my father was instructed to do was to take me to Mackinac Island, Michigan, where the Michigan governor's mansion is located. At that time, the governor of Michigan was George Romney. George Romney was very much aware of MKUltra mind control and very much interested in implementing mind control on a grand scale. It was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, that I was prostituted to various politicians to fulfill their perversions, because they never dreamed that one day I would be able to think, to tell about those perversions, about their pedophile perversions with a little child. One politician that I met in Mackinac Island, Michigan, in the summer of 1968, was then Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau was very much interested in implementing mind control of the masses because Pierre Trudeau is a professed Jesuit. Jesuits are the intelligence arm of the Catholic Vatican. And there was a criminal faction of the Jesuits that was very much interested in the Catholic Church being the one world church in the New World Order. And they firmly believed in mind control. This is not to say that all Catholics are bad. That's absurd. It's not to say that all CIA is bad or that all American politicians or Canadian politicians are bad. There's good and bad in everything. There was a very definite criminal faction whose agenda was to implement this New World Order, this world dominance effort. And Pierre Trudeau was one who was very much interested in this aspect. He knew about the effects of trauma on the human mind. It was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, that I heard conversations between he and Governor Romney pertaining to mind control. And although I was just a little child and couldn't comprehend it, nor could I comprehend it because of my victimization and the trauma that I was enduring at the time, it was through the deprogramming process and writing out my memories of exactly what I heard verbatim, photographically, as recorded in my brain, that I began to understand what those conversations entailed. The conversations pertain to how the Catholics had long since learned the effects of trauma on the human mind through such things as the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusaders and the events that were happening long, long ago, that they had kept a record of the effects of the trauma and how the human mind responded to it. That information, combined with what the CIA had gleaned from the Hitler-Himmler research, merged together to make a very powerful form of absolute robotic mind control. Now, this was back in 1968. Since then, technology has advanced tremendously, as has mind control capabilities. But the trauma-based mind control that I was exposed to involved Catholic traumas. I was being raised in the Catholic Church. We belonged to Muskegon St. Francis de Sales Church, which was heavily involved in MKUltra activities. The Jesuit influence in the church was working in conjunction with the CIA and the U.S. government and the Canadian government for mind control purposes. By the time I made my first communion, I was 13 years old. I was exposed to a ritual afterwards, an occult ritual that they termed the right to remain silent. That's spelled R-I-T-E, as in ritual. This blood ritual that I endured was so horrific, So absolutely mind-blowing that my conscious mind took flight and my subconscious mind was wide open to manipulation. It was at that point that I lost control of my mind. Up until that point, I had that switching mechanism in my brain where the various compartments would actually open up as needed to be able to withstand the traumas that I was being exposed to. For example, when my father came in to sexually abuse me, the part of me that had dealt with his sexual abuse in the past, the neuron pathways of my brain actually physically opened up so that the part of me that dealt with that could deal with it again and again and again as needed. If I was exposed to child pornography, the part of my brain that knew how to deal with that child pornography would actually open up to deal with it again and again as needed. When I saw my father at the dinner table, or we were just doing routine things around the house, I didn't think of the sexual abuse that I'd been exposed to. It was compartmentalized. It was often another part of my brain. But when he unzipped his pants, the part of my brain that dealt with it opened up. And that was a natural switching mechanism that it goes with dissociative identity disorder and is the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. With this right to remain silent through hypnotic language, or NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, expert mind manipulation was put into place where they took control of the switching mechanisms through a series of hypnotic codes, keys, and triggers, and or hand signals. They could access the different compartments of my brain. They could program those different compartments to carry out those certain government operations or to fulfill certain perversions according to their controls. I no longer had the capacity to switch to deal with various abuses on my own. Up until that point, I had been able to have free thought on occasion. I remember thinking how I wish that there was some place in the world where people didn't abuse each other. I was hoping that I could have 10 children of my own. I wanted 10. It was just a good Catholic number, I don't know. But I wanted to have 10 children, all my own to raise, because I knew those 10 children would never be abused and I could take good care of them and just love them. Because my whole environment was just saturated with incest, child abuse, mind control. And yet I'd had that capacity to hope until that right to remain silent. Until the right to remain silent, I could make decisions, taking from the different perceptions that were formulated in the different compartments of my brain. And I'd hear my voice arguing back and forth in my head in order to make a decision. And I'd pull all these different perceptions together and actually make some kind of a decision until the right to remain silent. With the right to remain silent, I lost all capacity for free thought. I never had a free thought anymore. I had no ability to even hope for a place where people acted in love. With that right to remain silent, I no longer heard my voice arguing in my head. From that point on, all I could hear was the voices of my abusers instructing me on exactly what it was that I was supposed to do. At Mackinac Island, Michigan, I was subjected to another ritual, a sexual abuse ritual, that was to induct me into what is known as the Order of the Rose. The Order of the Rose is the global elite that are working on New World Order controls. It's not another boys' club. It's not another one of those Masonic Illuminati secret organizations like that. It's not structured that way. What it is instead is a signifier, a rose signifier to those in the know that they were a part of New World Order efforts. It's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, it's an agenda, it's something that they believe in, which certainly is foreign to our way of thinking, but nevertheless, it's the way they think, and they signaled each other through this rose. And it was under the Order of the Rose that I was forced to operate during my White House Pentagon level mind control victimization. Pierre Trudeau is a noted member of the Order of the Rose, as is Governor Romney. And Pierre Trudeau was part of the sexual abuse, the trauma, and used his expertise of manipulating minds to control my mind and to thrust me into this Order of the Rose. My exposure to Pierre Trudeau was very limited in numbers of times that I saw him, but nevertheless, the impact that he had on my victimization was very significant. After the right to remain silent, it was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, that I met who had become my owner under MK Ultra Mind Control. That was U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd has been in office as long as I've been alive, and he remains in office today. He's a very powerful and influential senator from the state of West Virginia, a Democrat. You'll notice that the names I name don't have anything to do with political party lines. For example, Gerald Ford is a Republican, Byrd is a Democrat. Because not only were there not party lines, but this wasn't even about United States constitutional values and the betterment of American ideals. Instead, I didn't even know that there was a border between our two countries. I didn't know there was a Canadian-U.S. border. I didn't perceive it that way because I was back and forth across it, and I witnessed and experienced the relationship that Pierre Trudeau had with the political leaders of the United States. And it was all the same agenda. It was all for the same outcome and the same goal. Senator Byrd held the purse strings of the United States for many years as head of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He decided what money would be designated where, for what purposes. And his purposes, of course, were New World Order. It was because of Senator Byrd's position, when he became my owner in this project, that my father became extremely wealthy through military contracts that were appropriated his way on his 6th grade education because of having sold me to Senator Byrd. Senator Byrd, as my owner, directed my activities. He decided where I would be taken when, which criminal covert operations I was forced to participate in, what government leaders I would be prostituted to, and where I would be taken, which military and NASA installations I would be taken to for sophisticated mind control programming. Senator Byrd directed my activities throughout my victimization. It was Senator Byrd who ordered that I be sent to Muskegon Catholic Central High School, which was heavily involved in the initial groundwork for what would later be known as Global Education 2000. Global Education 2000 was being implemented worldwide, and the Catholic CIA influence in Muskegon Catholic Central was ideal for a test ground for that kind of activity because I was subjected to occult ritual in the school chapel, which left my mind photographic to absorb the information in the school system. I got straight A's. I did real good in school, but I didn't have any ability to critically use any of the information that I had. I had no creativity with it. I couldn't critically analyze it. I just robotically accepted it in, just like some kind of a tape recorder, some kind of a machine. It was while I was at Muskegon Catholic Central that Gerald Ford went into the office of president. This was absolutely devastating to me. It was like the last straw. It was what just completely locked me into mind control and locked me into the idea that indeed I had no place to run and no place to hide, as they'd conditioned me to believe. After all, I thought, who could I turn to? I couldn't turn to my parents. I couldn't turn to my church. I couldn't turn to my school. I couldn't turn to local politicians, and now I couldn't even turn to the President of the United States. I truly believe that the whole world was involved in mind control. Senator Byrd later ordered that I be sent to the backwoods of Louisiana under the control of my first mind control handler, a guy named Wayne Cox. Wayne Cox was involved in the country music industry, but he was also working paramilitary operations, mercenary operations, under the direction of Louisiana Senator J. Bennett Johnston. At that time, J. Bennett Johnston had been running mercenaries who had been programmed from childhood, as I had been, and conditioned from childhood under MK Ultra, to carry out these secret operations at that time in South America. These guys had been targeted to carry out their mercenary operations for that pinpoint accuracy in their shooting and their physical endurance and all of the other superhuman qualities of dissociative identity disorder. Whereas with my victimization, since it was my sexuality that had been confused and enhanced from infancy, I was used primarily as a sex slave. As a sex slave, I was prostituted to the various government leaders. I was prostituted to drug lords. And the perversions that occurred with these particular politicians were being covertly filmed from little cameras in the ceiling, because these criminals don't trust each other. Instead, they blackmailed each other through these perverse films and for other means that they had to control them. Because in essence, they all had each other by the perversion, and they were able to maintain each other that way. So I was used primarily as a sex slave, delivering messages to and from these government leaders that I was prostituted to in the process, plus distributing drugs throughout the United States and Canada. In Louisiana, Wayne Cox was an occult serial killer who was being used to provide a trauma base for mind control for these certain mercenary operations under J. Bennett Johnston's direction. Senator Byrd wanted me to be exposed to more occult traumatization to create a whole bunch of those little compartments in my mind so that I could be programmed in all kinds of various ways for the different operations that I'd be forced to carry out during the Reagan-Bush administration. Once my mind had been prepared, it was 1978, and I was exposed to J. Bennett Johnston at that time. Senator Johnston's intelligence level was just really high up there. It was beyond my realm to comprehend, especially under mind control, but it was just incomprehensible intelligence. It really seemed alien to me. And he told me, he said, "I'm an alien." I was part of the Philadelphia experiment, and when that ship disappeared, it came back a spaceship. Now, this air-water reversal is in keeping with a NASA theme that is used heavily. But nevertheless, when he told me that this ship had come back a spaceship, he showed me through his General Dynamics office a top-secret stealth fighter. In 1978, this was still classified information. It wasn't available in the newspapers for sure. It wasn't available in college textbooks or anything that I was exposed to. So when I saw this triangular ship, it looked alien to me. J. Bennett Johnston wanted me to believe that he was an alien in order that I feel totally helpless, as though what was happening to me was beyond my realm to affect. The same way that the occult traumatizations that I experienced with these demons and devils, and in fact these were people, but nevertheless they were telling us demons and devils to make me feel like there was nothing I could do to affect it. We all need to be aware that these criminals know how we think. They know that we're all limited in our thought by our own perceptions and our own life experiences. These criminals are at least 25 years ahead of us technologically and with information. What's it going to do to all of us when we see what technology that they do have if they reveal it to us today? Consider what's happened in the last 25 years, from the advent of microwave ovens to the computerization, and they've had all this technology to advance their technology through this next 25 years. So when I say they're 25 years ahead of us, that is an understatement. I know from having been on the White House Pentagon level behind the scenes of the New World Order effort that there is a very deliberate plan, to make all of us feel totally helpless, to the point where we'll say, come on, New World Order, save us all. When they reveal the technology that they have that is so alien to all of us, bear in mind that they are that far advanced ahead of us, and consider other perceptions, consider other angles, consider that they could be manipulating our minds, consider that this might not be alien after all. I am not saying that there's no such thing as aliens. I'm not saying that at all. Matter of fact, I'd like to believe there's some more intelligent life out there somewhere. But nevertheless, the fact remains that we need to separate the deliberate government misinformation from what's real, so that we can determine what is real in extraterrestrial intelligence. J. Bennett Johnston certainly convinced me at that point in time. And I felt totally helpless. And he programmed me to carry out my first operation. He actually took me to a military base in Oklahoma, Tinker Air Force Base, where I was programmed through sophisticated means to carry out my first trial run operation. At that time, when the planes would take the mercenaries down into South America, J. Bennett Johnston did not believe that they should come back empty, and these planes came back full of cocaine. It was my experience that the CIA's so-called war on drugs is no more than the CIA eliminating their competition as they took over the drug industry worldwide. The CIA's war on drugs is being waged on our street corners, not only in the United States, but in Canada and on a global scale. It's turned our streets into a bloodbath because of this enormous excess of drugs that's been brought into our countries. I certainly would not have distributed any drugs had I had any control over my own mind and had my own free will. But at the time I was totally robotic, and I carried out the instructions to take a large quantity of cocaine and deliver it into the neighboring state of Arkansas to a remote airport in Ouachita Forest that I've since identified as Mena Airport. In 1978, Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas. Bill Clinton's cocaine operation was already in full swing and was being used as a funding mechanism for the New World Order controls. He was part of the Order of the Rose. He was a part of this ongoing New World Order effort, and he had already established enormous drug routes at that time. I also delivered a personal stash of cocaine to Bill Clinton, along with a message and a packet of information. I watched Bill Clinton cut out 2 lines of the cocaine, and he did inhale. He snorted the cocaine. That wasn't the first time I saw Bill. That was the first time I saw Bill Clinton using cocaine, but it certainly wasn't the last. I saw him using it repeatedly throughout my victimization, right up until 1988 when Mark rescued Kelly and I. My exposure to Bill Clinton was limited pretty much to the drug industry. My sexual experience with him was extremely limited because my experience was that I have witnessed Bill Clinton involved in homosexual activity. It is my experience that Bill Clinton, like Hillary Clinton, is bisexual, leaning far more towards a homosexual end. It's Hillary Clinton that accessed my sex programming to fulfill her perversions. Hillary Clinton is very much aware of New World Order efforts and is very much a part of Order of the Rose operations. By 1980, my daughter Kelly was born. And as quickly as she was born, Senator Byrd ordered that we be transferred back to Nashville, Tennessee, where we were under the control of my second mind control handler, Alex Houston. Alex Houston is a ventriloquist, stage hypnotist in the country music industry. Alex Houston is the criminal that Mark referred to on how he met me, because up until 1988, I was under the control of Alex Houston. As my handler, Alex Houston followed Senator Byrd's directions to ensure that I was in the designated places at specific times so that I would be used to carry out these various criminal covert operations. He also took me to the military and NASA installations for mind control programming as Senator Byrd instructed. Kelly was exposed to sophisticated NASA mind control technology from birth. Her victimization was far more high-tech than mine was, and it's going to take the same high-tech mechanisms to give her full access to her brain again and give her control over her own mind. But the government doesn't want to release this information. If they were to release the antidote for mind control, they would have to admit that it exists. And they don't want to admit that mind control exists because they're wanting to manipulate us all by it. Was a vehicle by which I know and was unfortunately forced to participate in bringing drugs over the border into Canada, which I find deeply disturbing. And again, from my experience, I didn't know that there was a border between our countries because we were allowed to freely cross the borders with the drugs during the Reagan-Bush administration. In 1984, I had heard Bill Clinton and George Bush discussing how when the American population became disillusioned with Republicans leading them into the New World Order, that Bill Clinton, as a Democrat, would be put into place. He had earned his way into a high position of influence because of the cocaine route that he was running, because of his influence in the New World Order, Order of the Rose controls. It was my experience that Bill Clinton answered to George Bush, as did many other world leaders, not robotically, not under mind control, but because of George Bush's extreme intelligence and inside knowledge of exactly what it would take to bring about this world dominance effort. It was my experience that George Bush has run our country through 3 administrations. Ronald Reagan's, his own, and Bill Clinton's. George Bush's influence has been very heavy and very strong and powerful. He began with the United Nations. career began with the United Nations. Then he went on to head our CIA. He went on into the political end and became vice president and president, with his allegiances remaining to the United Nations and the New World Order controls. Back at that same time, it was discussed how the groundwork for NAFTA was being laid, and I was forced to participate in this groundwork, all of which is detailed in our book, Transformation of America. The groundwork for NAFTA was rooted in criminal, corrupt activities. It had been determined back in 1984 that George Bush, who was vice president at that time, would become president, which certainly makes me wonder, what are elections all about? It was already determined. It was also determined at that time the president of Mexico was President de la Madrid, who I was exposed to repeatedly. And under him was Vice President Salinas, who I was also exposed to. It was my experience during those years that Salinas was actually in control of Mexico, the same way that Bush was in control of the United States. And Salinas, too, respected George Bush's leadership. And it had been determined that when George Bush came into the office of President of the United States, that Salinas would go into the office of President of Mexico. And they would then implement NAFTA, which is exactly what happened. But we needed the Canadian aspect in there. That had already been established. I was exposed to Brian Mulroney on several occasions and was well aware of his involvement and participation in the Order of the Rose. Just like Pierre Trudeau, he too was involved in it. That's not to say that whatever little political details that you all were exposed to through the media and that happened were the same, because there are differences through different politicians and different administrations. But nevertheless, it all comes towards the same goal. It all went to New World Order controls because ultimately Pierre Trudeau and Brian Mulroney's ultimate goal was exactly the same. I was exposed to Brian Mulroney during a White House cocktail party when Senator Byrd was acting in the capacity of a pimp as usual and prostituting me to then President Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, in turn, had encouraged Brian Mulroney to utilize my sexual programming along with several other mind-controlled slaves. It was my experience that Brian Mulroney's perversion was a perversion of power. It was a perversion of using various mind-controlled slaves, and he liked more than one. One other mind-controlled slave that I was prostituted to him to had known him and been prostituted repeatedly. He was one of her primary abusers. She's Arlen Specter's mind-controlled slave. Senator Arlen Specter is very influential in the United States. He's very powerful. And she was his mind-controlled slave. And she was prostituted to Brian Mulroney repeatedly, and she and I were prostituted together to him because we had been programmed together. We had been what's called mirror programmed, where we would act in unison to together fulfill the perversion of, at that time, Brian Mulroney. Most disturbing thing that happened was this cocktail party that was honoring him as the guest at the time had provided me the latitude of hearing a conversation between he and Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan said at that time that he believed the only way to world peace was through mind control of the masses. The far-reaching ramifications of this statement are very apparent to me from having been under mind control. I wonder at a world peace where there's no free thought. Because without free thought, there's no free will, and without free will, there's no soul expression. So how can we have world peace where there's no soul expression and people don't have any peace of mind? I firmly believe that world peace is going to be a natural occurrence when people realize their soul connection. When they have the kind of spirituality that gives them that inner peace. Because when they have inner peace, that's when I believe we'll have world peace. I certainly don't believe that we're going to have world peace through controlling people and turning them into robots the way that Ronald Reagan believed. I believe that each and every one of us needs to realize that spiritual connection and have that soul strength in order to deal with the realities that we're all having to face today. These are very difficult times on a global scale. And the truth that is finally coming forth is not always pretty. I think people have an idea that truth is supposed to be some kind of flowery, pretty thing that's just some kind of wonderful something, when in fact, it doesn't have anything to do with truth. As my friend Wes Mann said earlier today, truth just is. And the truth that we're all having to deal with is that we're going to have to evolve with the knowledge of mind control in order to protect ourselves against it. We have got to maintain our free thought in order to take back our respective countries and restore the kind of moralities and freedoms that we've been used to. Justice has been eroded, particularly in the United States. It needs to be reestablished. When good people take control of the government once again, then we can realize all the positive benefits of the information that they've been manipulating all of us by. The positive benefits are certainly enormous, which is why they're keeping them secret. It's absolutely inexcusable that this small handful of criminals, and that's all it is a small handful of criminals, that they're allowed to continue to run our world into this world dominance effort. We, as spiritual, good people, need to gather the strength and the fortitude to be able to stand up to these criminals and get them out of office, to get them out of power, and to allow truth to prevail. This is a time for truth to prevail. It's a time for the information to be used for the betterment of humanity and for the evolvement of all of us, the spiritual evolvement of us all. The criminal activities that I was forced to participate in, particularly as pertains to NAFTA, particularly as pertains to the drug industry that has so adversely affected so many people in society. The deliberate erosion of justice that has allowed for pedophile perversions to proliferate for mind control purposes. The perversions that I was forced to fulfill. And knowing that my daughter was being used likewise was absolutely horrible and is detailed in Transformation of America. Because you have a right to these details. You have a right to know what the plan is. You have a right to know who each and every one of these criminals are. When Mark rescued Kelly and I in 1988, I couldn't think to escape. I didn't have that capacity any more than I had the capacity to think to protect my daughter. Under MK Ultra mind control, I was manipulated by my maternal instincts. I was manipulated by my religion. I was manipulated by my patriotism and my love for humanity as a whole. These are deep-reaching And they certainly were effective for robotic mind control. I'm extremely fortunate that Mark came along when he did and rescued us. He rescued me from certain death. I was 30 years old, which they considered too old. They considered 30 too old for fulfilling sexual perversions. And not only that, but at age 30, there's certain electrochemical changes that occur in our brains that make a difference for so many people, that they didn't want to take a chance on any secrets being revealed that I had been exposed to, particularly as pertained to NAFTA. And therefore, I was to be killed in a snuff film. This was to fulfill perversions, which there's an enormous market for, unfortunately. I know that's beyond our realm of comprehension and ability to think of, but there are people who are so perverse that they enjoy snuff films where a person is actually killed. The fate for my daughter was going to be far worse. This video evidence of my death was also going to be used to ensure government leaders that the secrets were gone with me. But they never counted on what would happen when a good man like Mark Phillips gained knowledge of mind control. They never considered how it could be used for good. They never considered how it could be used to restore a mind rather than control one. And Mark came in just at the right time to intercept me en route to my death and Callie's horrible fate. And he took us to the safety and serenity of Alaska, where I began to remember those things I was supposed to forget. When Mark came along, I certainly didn't have a capacity to trust. I didn't know how to trust. Yet, when he rescued us right out from under the noses of the CIA, he took the time to rescue our farm animals, because Kelly and I were being maintained on a 100-acre farm where we had dogs and cats, guineas, chickens, horses, and cows, all of which Kelly and I loved dearly. We loved our animals. But it's my experience that criminals who abuse children abuse animals, and people who abuse animals abuse children. It's some kind of disrespect for life that seems to go hand in hand. Everybody I knew abused animals. And yet Mark took the time to come in and rescue our animals. Additionally, he had pets that he had rescued. He had pet raccoons, and he had a dog, and they all loved him. The coons would actually hug him and wrap their arms around him, and I'd never seen animals that could trust. And even though I couldn't think to rationalize all of this out, I had this sense, this animal instinct myself that let me know that if the animals could trust him, I could too. This had a profound effect on Kelly as well. With Mark's loving expertise, I began remembering. And as quickly as I began remembering, which is certainly I'm going into much, much more detail tomorrow during our workshop on exactly how the memory recovery happens and what happens in the brain and what the positive benefits are. But I began writing out my memories in photographic detail. And as fast as these memories were validated by the clean, supportive members of law enforcement and the intelligence community, not only in the United States but in Canada as well, had a profound impact on our situation, as a matter of fact. As quickly it was validated, it was disseminated and scattered everywhere so that those criminals couldn't stop the truth. They never thought, they never dreamed that I would ever recover. They never considered the strength of the human spirit. And therefore, we had just enough time for me to remember these events and disseminate them. Now silencing us is not going to stop the truth. The truth is already out. Kelly was not as fortunate as I was, because as quickly as she began having memory flashes of what had happened to her during the Reagan-Bush administration and how she was used to fulfill political perversions, she went into respiratory failure and was hospitalized at Humana Hospital in Anchorage, Alaska. She was not responding to conventional medications, but she did respond to therapeutic intervention. At that time, we were working diligently to get Kelly the high-tech help that she would need for deprogramming, because the methods that were used to deprogram me did not apply to Kelly. And at that time, through a series of events of which Senator Byrd was involved with his political influence, Kelly was thrust into the immoral and illegal custody of the state of Tennessee. Kelly remains a political prisoner today, institutionalized and denied any rehabilitation for the proven MK Ultra mind control abuses she endured. Kelly had experienced love, though, and love is the greatest healer of all. Because of that love, because Kelly is not being hurt at this time, she was able to regain some free thought. And Kelly knows exactly who and what Mark and I are up against in our effort to get this information out. And she is waiting patiently and impatiently for people to wake up to the reality of mind control, so that no other children will be victimized, and so that she can receive the qualified rehabilitation that she deserves. Kelly knows, like Mark and I know, that knowledge is our only defense against mind control. It is truth that sets us free. Please, help us spread the word. Help us get this information out. Despite our controlled medias, despite the suppression of this information, people, good people like yourselves, are taking the information and disseminating it among their friends and among their loved ones and among people in political positions to make a difference. And I encourage each and every one of you, please, we need you to help us spread the word. Thank you.
We're going to have an auction, actually just a draw for the one of Cathy and Mark's book, and then we're going to have a short break. So I'll have Cathy draw this.
During the break, folks, please, if you have any written questions, pass them to Wes. He'll be going around up and down the aisles and mingling amongst you. And those of you who need to excuse yourselves, you all have been sitting very patiently for some time now. We would like to answer as many questions as humanly possible, as long as they're within the realm of our topic. There's a lot of information I get every day because of all the thousands and literally millions of people that are waking up worldwide. We're inundated with information, and a lot of it goes unnoticed until people begin to wonder if I'm under mind control. But the information that we can supply you with some comfort, knowing that it's accurate, is stuff on mind control. There's an opportunity that's going to prevail. I met this man in Washington, D.C. Though the name of Lynn Horowitz. He's a dentist that became a whistleblower. And he's real interested in some of the research involved in the emerging viruses that seem to be coming out of nowhere. Green monkey stuff and all that kind of thing. Ebola and, of course, AIDS. Lynn Horowitz is not on the nut fringe. He was a very successful oral surgeon and dentist. I met him and his family, and I was very impressed. He has a book that is extraordinarily well documented. And Lynn Horowitz, unlike Cathy, was not affected by this stuff. He just feels compelled, like we do and any other whistleblower, to get this information out, and at tremendous economic sacrifice to himself and his family. they're very supportive, and I'm very supportive of Lynn Horowitz. And I know that each of you will find his information extremely applicable to some of the questions that you've had about this thinning out of the world's population. A Tennessean by the name of, oh, well, I won't say his name, I don't even like to. He happens to be Vice President of the United States when he attended the UN conference on population control. Some of his suggestions validated Lynn Horowitz's book on emerging viruses. One last announcement before we break. Tomorrow night we're going to be talking about mind control. We're going to be covering all aspects of it, how you can recognize and identify it, and it's going to be an interactive workshop. We normally limit these workshops to about 70 people because we want everybody to get the answers that they are anxious to find out about, particularly the areas of interest. And a lot of people are interested in things like subliminal advertising and marketing, and others are interested in the electronic aspect of mind control, what's out there technologically, what's real, what's actually being fed to us to maintain us in some sort of a fear mode, because as our dear friend David Icke told you, fear is their #1 psychological warfare weapon. And it is fear that is keeping this room from being absolutely packed. Now, we have gone into some areas where people, where there's large pods or networks of people where we'll have thousands of folks to talk to. But I'll tell you right now that the vast majority of them are suffering from that controlling factor known as fear. Here's a 4-letter word that begins with F that I don't like. And it's one that if it ever got a hold of Cathy or I, we could not do what we're doing. But tomorrow night, we want to talk about everything there is to know that we have, that we can document clinically, as well as the Freedom of Information Act stuff, as well as what the research that has emerged in the past 8 years through diligent efforts on the behalf of good psychiatrists and good psychologists. And we want to share that information with you, and we want to answer all your questions and dispel some of this fear, because as dreadful as this information is, it does have some extraordinary relief valves. So in the meantime, let's take a break, and we'll be back there signing a book or two for you, for those of you who don't need to go use the facilities, and see you back in about, say 25 minutes. Thanks. Oh, okay. We got, well, let me do it. Don't, the name Claire Earl. Come get your free book, whoever you are. You want it. Fair and square.
I guess I just didn't understand.
Now listen, if you all have any more questions, just keep passing them towards that man right there. Cathy and I work in mental health and law enforcement. Mental health, particularly in the field of psychiatry, are the most educated people in terms of years dedicated on the face of this earth. I don't know how many psychiatrists we have in the room tonight, but this is no insult to you. You're part of the youngest of all the healing arts, and you're probably the most contained as far as information goes, particularly as pertains to memory. Questions that we received from psychiatrists were juvenile, or shall we say, very uninformed compared to those of the average citizen, because you folks have been brainwashed. You understand the logic behind how the mind works. Most people understand that our brains work like computers, which is how the concept of computers came into reality. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. We got a few of them here, and again, I want to thank Westman and the Preferred Network, who has dedicated his life and his resources to making sure that folks like yourselves and other folks associated with you, your loved ones, whether they like the information you're imparting to them or not, are getting at least some remnants of actually what's going on behind the scenes that's controlling all of us. Some of these questions I may have difficulty. First one I looked at, does HARP have anything to do with mind control? HARP is part of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. I am not an expert on HARP. I have toured with Dr. Nick Begich, who is. Dr. Nick Begich is a physicist who is a very brilliant man. I knew his father very briefly. His father died in a tragic accident in Alaska. His body was supposedly never found. That too is a bunch of bunk. It was found by some Civil Air Patrol folks that I know that worked for the FAA, and it was all covered up for reasons of national security. He was killed with a fellow who was involved in the oil company out of Louisiana, Congressman or U.S. Senator there. Nick Begich is a whistleblower, and I'll tell you what, he is one of those brave folks that I have a lot of respect for. And HARP is a book that I strongly suggest you read. It involves weather modification. It involves the Van Allen belts, actually, around the Earth, that circle the Earth. It's tapping into it as an energy source and as a source of control of certain types of frequencies that affect our brain stems. And HARP, even though it's in the infantile stages at this point, is being developed at a very rapid rate. The Soviets, at that time, I know that way, I'm kind of brainwashed. The Russians were particularly interested in this stuff in the 50s and 60s, and actually had it going to some degree very effectively. Obviously, it's not that effective yet. The system that is based out of Anchorage, or just out north of Anchorage, Alaska, which I've got pictures of, which we've actually seen, is a good example of what I believe is going to be emerging in the future as a possibility of, again, some knowledge that can be used for extraordinary good or extraordinary evil. It depends on who's running it. So HARP is also under the MK Ultra umbrella. That should answer the question, does it have anything to do with mind control? Back to that one. Let's get that one for a minute. What can you tell us about Heaven's Gate Golf and so-called suicide? I'll tell you some interesting facts. We've been on the road, so naturally I lose out on a lot of stuff, but one of my friends, a Reverend Rick Strawcutter, who's one of those incredible Christian ministers who is not concerned with controlling people, but explaining to them what's controlling them, and not using religion to show them what to think, but instead give them an honest access to their spirituality and discovering their spirituality. Reverend Strawcutter is a buddy of mine. He got a packet from Heaven's Gate. You know why he got it? Because he's one of the most successful book distributors of this kind of information in the world. And they were setting up on him. Strawcutter is very brilliant. He took the information directly to his lawyer. Together they went down to the FBI building and said, "It smells like setup. Don't include this." Reverend Strawcutter made front pages of most of the newspapers in Lower 48, and he also made national news as being a right-wing, this, that, and the other. I mean, they labeled this poor guy with every conceivable label you can imagine. Bottom line was the sales went up, thank God. But he's a book distributor. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Heaven's Gate before Cathy interrupted me. The founder of Heaven's Gate came from a little area just outside of the town of Indianapolis, Indiana. Oh, by the way, same place where our one of our former vice presidents came from, who was very literal and couldn't spell potato. In addition to that, there was another guy that you might remember the name, Jim Jones. He too came from that area, along with some 70-odd other cult leaders that have come and gone, also emerged out of that area. It is also well known within the CIA circles that this was an area of concentrated research because of some religious belief systems and because of the cooperation of local officials that began in earnest in the late 1960s. By the mid-1970s, they had pretty much done all they were going to do. The New York Times reported in 1971 that they had a confidential informant that was willing to testify before Congress that the Central Intelligence Agency had hired a number of people to infiltrate none other than satanic cults and really occultic groups that were utilizing blood rituals, human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, and other horrific forms of torture to affect the minds of the onlookers. The CIA was extremely interested in what it did to those people that witnessed these hideous acts of human depravity. Now, that article asked the question is, why is the CIA interested in infiltrating these kinds of cults? The suicides, the mass suicides of the Heaven's Gate people seem to have coincided with something that has only recently emerged. As many of you know, one of the members of actually the person second in command of Heaven's Gate, very brilliant fellow, was the brother of a very famous black actress on the Star Trek series. This woman is now the spokesman for NASA, and she is the spokesman for a project that NASA is offering to all of us in here, that we can have our ashes put in a capsule and put in orbit. They just sent off a missile 7 days ago, and this missile put into orbit some 4,500 different folks in these little capsules. One was Timothy Leary, who said he wanted to have the ultimate trip. I can understand that. I also think that there was also some of the Heaven's Gate people that were a little slow, couldn't catch up with Hale-Bopp, riding the tail. And so they wanted their ashes put into orbit. Well, their ashes ain't going to stay in orbit because they're going to come floating down and burn up like so much other debris in about 10 years. The bottom line is, why has NASA suddenly got into the funeral directing business? And why did this Heaven's Gate thing come along just at the right time? You know, nothing in politics happens by accident. Nothing. Nothing. Remember that statement. Nothing is by accident. And this Heaven's Gate thing opened up a whole lot of questions. But one of the questions that was answered to me was, I printed out, close to a 100-page manifesto that was on the internet that Heaven's Gate had on their webpage. The repetitious statement made by the leader was, aside from shooting things like, you got to get castrated if you're a male, that was real exciting, was the fact that no one was allowed to think. Thinking was forbidden. Okay? Most people, when they say, well, I think I might want to do that, I had fellows that I worked with in NASA that forbid me to say the word think. They said, you either say you're going to do it or you want to do it, but don't say you think you're going to want to do it. Well, in NLP, what that means is you're undecided. And under mind control, you don't have the ability to be undecided because your decisions are being made for you. So the underlying current in this manifesto that was released by the Heaven's Gate folks shows a definite correlation that these people were under some sort of horrific, sophisticated mind control. Now these were not stupid people. Most people think that people that join cults are people who are antisocial or can't get along in society, and they just need a place to belong. This may be true in some Christian subcults. This is not true in the type of cults that Heaven's Gate was. Heaven's Gate, I believe, was nothing more than just a Jonestown in miniature that was used for a variety of reasons. Uncle Sam never does anything for a singular cause. But I just wanted to point out a few of these little oddities that are emerging, like where these leaders are coming from and where some of this stuff is happening. We've been invited to speak in Indianapolis, and we've been invited to speak in the very area, as a matter of fact, 2 blocks down the street from where Jim Jones's first church was.
Are you familiar with the Franklin affair? The Franklin cover-up is a case that parallels our case and involves mind control and some of the same victimizers that my daughter and I were subjected to, namely George Bush and Alex Houston. Paul Bonacci, the victim of mind control in the Franklin case, has named Alex Houston as an abuser, and Alex Houston had a key to Boys Town where Paul Bonacci had been abused and under mind control, because Alex Houston went there routinely to indulge in his pedophile perversion as well as manipulate the minds of the traumatized children. The Franklin case is one, we've got a little a book available that's called The Carefully Crafted Hoax, with a foreword by the former FBI agent Ted Gunderson, who's well respected down in the States.
So, by the way, I'm going to try to weasel him up here to speak to you all.
He's
Ted
got a lot of
Gunderson was at
information.
one time third in command of the FBI. He's very articulate. He looks like a Fed, and he talks like a Fed, but he is a spiritual being who is a human being and a great person.
He's a good man. But we've got The Carefully Crafted Hoax, which is a very rare book anywhere these days, since the Franklin cover-up, the book version is now out. But The Carefully Crafted Hoax is an outline, step by step, of what happened to these children and how the cover-up was perpetuated. The book is available through Wes Mann's preferred network in a very limited number and through very limited editions, but nevertheless it's available, and more information is available there.
Yeah, well, like there's a psychologist who works with her husband, a psychiatrist, I believe. She goes by the name of Denson Gerber. Her husband was the guy that evaluated Oswald and for the Warren Commission. He said that he was not a mind control person, that he acted alone, and somehow was the most incredible shot with the most incredibly magic bullets that ever have been on the face of the earth. Denson Gerber was also the one that was court appointed to represent the poor plaintiffs in the case in Nebraska. It's called the Franklin cover-up. When I was brought into the case, and the FBI invited me to come in because their intelligence connection dropped off at a certain point. I was brought in to find out why the case was crumbling underneath them. Well, Denson Gerber was my #1 focus, and I said, "Do you know who she is?" Well, after they looked at that, that was a real surprise and an eye-opener, but unfortunately it was too late. She'd already done damage. And then the other witnesses that were being brought forth were actually in another state, in the state of California, also involved in another case mirroring that case, which is called the Presidio case. And the Denson Gerber and all that group had hired an attorney to represent them. And guess what? It's the same attorney that Jim Jones used to set up Jonestown. So, I mean, containment, the CIA can fool the best of them. The attorney that was involved in all of this, Yeah, John DeCamp, who was representing all these plaintiffs. John brought me in his office and he said, all right, he said, so the government sent in the folks on us to cover up the case on the psychological end, and then when we got our witnesses thing contaminated, and I said, yeah, and I said, you're getting it from another end, from a group called the LaRouches, who put out just nothing but truth about George Bush. But they have somehow, Lyndon LaRouche has managed to miraculously separate criminals according to political affiliation. I don't know how he does it. It defies all logic. The LaRouches wanted to support us until I said, until you can explain how in the world you can separate George Bush and Bill Clinton in their drug operations, I'm only interested in talking about your operation as being a part of the problem. But Denson Gerber, most recently, thank you, has been brought in as the expert testimony on Patsy Ramsey, the mother of Jean-Benet Ramsey. So I can tell you right now, I'm very sorry to say that Patsy Ramsey, the mother, has got a most unfortunate name. She is fixing to be another McVeigh, Oswald. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I don't know what her level of involvement was, but I've got a funny feeling, and you heard it right here, that she is going to take a serious fall on all of this. She was from West Virginia. She was a beauty queen, and her statements that she has made has been consistent with someone who has either undergone a severe nervous breakdown, which she legitimately should be entitled to, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or mind control. What's Elizabeth Loftus? Maggie Brush, Stephen Cecil's connection. Wow, I can't answer that. I don't know. Elizabeth, I really can't answer that question. I probably can answer that question if whoever wrote it to me is willing to look in the back of the book and write it to me, then I can punch it up and give you that information. I'm sorry. That's a very important question, but I really can't get into it other than to tell you that Elizabeth Loftus is an adversary of ours. We have a federal election coming up in Canada. What do you know about the current Canadian political leaders, especially Christianity? Well, I'm working on my imitation, but other than that, I don't know much about him. Someone says, I've been told he's a homosexual. Is this true? Thank God I can't tell you. But he was he did go down to see his good friend Bill Clinton, and they went out and played golf, and you know something about golf, they have to watch those things they play with, and oh, gee willikers, I don't know. I don't, right now, there's not a heck of a lot of these world leaders that I do trust. I am seeing some enormous changes on lower levels, but this prime minister presidential omnipotent level, I'm not seeing too many changes other than the fact that they're taking a lot of heat from a lot of folks. But a new set of world economic regulations are being formulated in Europe that will allow the foreign takeover and domination of all Canadian institutions. I'll tell you what I think of this. I think it just plain sucks. I'm sorry about my language, but Canadians have one thing that other governments don't have. Like you guys own your own bank. You own your own bank until Pierre Trudeau got a hold of you. You didn't owe any money. Now, I'm very sorry for y'all, because what's happening here is the Canadians are, for a good example, the price you pay in gasoline, you guys are floating on a pool of gasoline, in essence, of oil over in Alberta. You ran out all the oil companies that were exploiting that because you were going to be bringing the price of fuel down worldwide. Plus the fact that you guys in Canada weren't going to be paying much more than about 15 cents a liter for it. And now I see the signs 58, 60, 61. That equates in my mind
best I can, is about 2.5 times the price that you pay just south of here. With a small population and the natural resources this country's got, you folks are getting molested worse than any country I know of. I don't usually get questions I can't answer about something when it comes to video stuff. Our question is a total audio video tactile retrain on a cognitive basis, precursor or to recall.
Precursor to recall. In other words, the audio video tactile retraining the brain of the cognitive things is a precursor to recall.
The answer to that question is yes. And tomorrow I've got a different way of expressing it, but the answer to that question is yes. How do you know when your subconscious is being targeted by certain commercials, particularly perfume ads, automobile ads, and ads to induce you into running out and joining the military? Boy, I don't see anybody here that want to do that. But there are ways of seeing it, and once you see how it's done, it's pretty clever. I think, you're hearing this right here, I think that every school in the world should teach neurolinguistics. In other words, the language of the unconscious, the language of the subconscious. I think it's inexcusable that this has been a hidden science just so that a handful of capitalists like myself can make a living off of it. I think it's inexcusable that it's not taught in schools, that we have the capacity to think on two separate levels. So, now here's a question that I don't have a clue about, and whoever wrote it, I hope to goodness they're going to be at the meeting tomorrow. Is there a connection to tonight's subject and the 13 Graymen? I don't know who the 13 Graymen were. I don't know what's alien to me.
Could you elaborate on the right to remain silent? More details on that right to remain silent are provided in our book, Transformation of America. The bottom line on it is that the blood trauma was so horrible that it caused my conscious mind to take flight and left me wide open to programming. And there's a lot of knowledge pertaining to the effects of trauma on the human mind to the extent where occultism is proliferating and being used as a trauma base for mind control. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino is the founder of the Occult Temple of Set. He is with the Psychological Warfare Division, which says quite a bit.
Graduated from War College, taught there. He claims he knows me well. He's only met me on one occasion. I thought he was a donkey. I use the best words I can. My language is atrocious, and I'm really working very difficult to clean it up.
But Michael Aquino was one of my primary mind control programmers. Now, I'll be talking about that more tomorrow and how he knew that the occult blood traumas would allow for mind control programming, which is why he's got that Temple of Set that's on the military bases in the United States. He was named in the Presidio daycare scandal that Mark mentioned a minute ago pertaining to mind control of numerous children, and he too knows that with the blood trauma combined with high voltage trauma, that mind control is imminent. It's also interesting to note that Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino is not allowed in your country. He's been banned from Canada.
As a matter of fact, I worked very diligently for 2 years with your, I don't think I'm even supposed to say it in public, your CIS, which is your Canadian Intelligence Agency. We worked very difficult strings to keep Mr. Aquino out of this country. Mr. Aquino is no longer welcome at the border. If we can catch him in this country, and there are a lot of folks in intelligence, a lot of folks in your Canadian customs who are aware of him, if they can catch him, coming up here for any reason. I've asked personally to be able, by your so-called Bureau of Prisons, I forget exactly what it is, to be allowed to spend a couple of hours with Mr. Aquino alone. Now, I got one more I want to talk about. This Elizabeth Loftus thing. Elizabeth Loftus, and this is about the False Memory Foundation. It's about an organization that cropped up out of nowhere that was run by some Denmark pedophiles who were in the child pornography business, that were running around contaminating cases of sexual child abuse against children so that the abusers would walk away not only with custody of the children, but of course walk away with managing somehow to get the poor mothers or other caregivers who were plaintiffs in the case locked up for insanity reasons or whatever. This false memory syndrome is not a disorder that's recognized by the American Psychiatric or American Psychological Association. It's still in the syndrome stage. It's still not totally accepted by mental health. And until mental health realizes that there is such a thing as false memory and that we all suffer from it, and how that we can actually separate real memory from false memory, they are going to continue winning cases and continue destroying people's lives and continue getting these poor children put back into the hands of the very people that were hurting them. Because doctors have got to realize that the information they were taught about memory and what's real and what isn't is not true. False memory can be installed. And I was very unpopular when I was talking about this before physicians, because they said, you're playing right into the hands. You're supporting the bad guys. No, I'm supporting a tool that the bad guys are using to slay you with, because what they're telling is the truth. And truth, believe it or not, is extraordinarily dangerous because it can be usually proven. And there's no one that can prove to me or anyone else that there's no such thing as a false memory. But between our minds developing false memories from movies and books and things that we're seen and told, and you got to remember that these people who've been abused are highly suggestible and highly literal, and they can be easily manipulated into believing that they experienced a fairy tale. That's why fairy tales and things like The Wizard of Oz are used to scramble memory. Because when somebody goes in, a child, 10 years old, and sits down in the witness stand and said, and the judge said, well, who exactly in this courtroom molested you? And the little girl or little boy says, well, they're not here right now that I recognize because it was Mickey Mouse. End of case. The whole thing goes out the room. The whole thing's dismissed. But what didn't happen was the fact that the person that may or may not have been in that room was a person who dressed up in Mickey Mouse suit. And this child, being traumatized, really believed that was Mickey Mouse or whomever. So false memory is quite real, but it's also very easy to determine whether or not it's a real memory or a false memory. And those are some of the elements and some of the things that we'll be touching on tomorrow, that when you've got relatives or loved ones that are suddenly disclosing 25, 30, 40 years later, I think Dad molested the squat out of me, or Dad did this, or Uncle so-and-so did that, and you say, well, why do you think that? They say, well, I had a bad dream about it, or I've been reading about all this abuse, and I always had this uncomfortable feeling about this uncle or this father or whomever. There's a way of telling those people how they can actually determine whether or not it's a real memory or something that they're fantasizing. It's very, very easy. That's the reason that I really wish that you folks could, those of you who are interested in this science and in this information and knowing what's controlling you, will be there tomorrow.
Was Patsy Cline a mind control victim?
No.
And did her death have anything to do with her being in her early 30s? I didn't know Patsy Cline, but in Patsy Cline's autobiography, Alex Houston is mentioned because when they were traveling, centered out of Washington, D.C., back in the days when Patsy Cline was popular, Alex Houston traveled with her. And it was his claim that she was, but that's just hearsay. At that same time, her and Loretta Lynn, who were very, very good friends, it was Loretta Lynn that I knew from personal experience was under mind control because she was a mind control slave of U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. And that information is in our book.
We also, in the second book, and that's part of the reason why I believe the country, when the thing's published, we also have a great deal of documents on Loretta Lynn from physicians that treated her, from physicians that have worked within the family, and from the district attorney that tried her son for murder. Her son is now her handler. Her son is, he's shot at people, he's attempted to murder several, he's paralyzed one poor girl from the waist down with a shotgun, and he was, his sentence was commuted if he would write a song about literacy for Barbara Bush. Now, isn't that strange? And I'll tell you what's even stranger is, he never wrote the darn song because he's illiterate. It doesn't take a genius to control somebody's mind.
Ernest Ray, the one that he's referring to, had told me at one point that he could get away with murder because he knew what Senator Byrd had done to his mother. Was Elvis Presley under mind control? I have no idea on that one.
Okay, I worked in and around that area. I knew Vernon, his father. I was working for the intelligence community at that time, and I was also interfacing with a mob in Las Vegas, and if you read our book, you'll see this. I had personal association, not with Elvis himself, but with his father. I did see a lot of his shows, and I did meet with him briefly for a minute or two. Elvis Presley was a drug addict. He was controlled with drugs by a most unscrupulous physician. But as far as being under mind control, no way. No possible way. And no, he's not working around Kmart.
Is Dolly Parton under mind control? Alex Houston claimed that she was. It wasn't that he said Dolly Parton's under mind control. It's that he discussed different components of mind control, of her being under MK Ultra Project MONARCH mind control. And it's interesting to note that her Dollywood has a monarch for the symbol. And I'm really glad to know that people are raising these questions pertaining to different entertainers, pertaining to the John Benet Ramsey case, pertaining to Heaven's Gate and other things. At least mind control has become a question these days. And can you tell us more about the situation where your daughter is, and are you able to communicate with her? I really appreciate this question. Since the release of our book, Transformation of America, Kelly is able to receive mail for the first time in 5 years, and Mark and I are able to have communication with her on a regular basis. Up until that time, the violations of laws and rights proliferating in her case were so extensive that a district attorney intervened on her behalf and told the judge that he was in violation of this law and this law and this law and this law. And he told this district attorney, he said, laws do not apply in this case for reasons of national security. Any of the evidence that we had pertaining to Kelly's victimization as well as my own were never allowed into the court for reasons of national security. We've got over 27,000 documents and evidences, videos, government insider testimony, sufficient for any legal procedure in the United States, including congressional.
By the way, it's swollen from 27,000 to well over 100,000. We've got federal lawyers, retired federal judges that are holding this stuff. Some of the most sensitive issues, such as photographs and that sort of thing, were turned over to certain members of Congress and other persons, because the federal government came to me and said, if you collect one more piece of evidence, we're going to lock you up for being in possession of child pornography. Somebody asked a question. Somebody asked a couple of incredibly good questions, and I thank you, whoever did. Does the New World Order intend to destabilize the economy of North America, or are we preserved from this tactic due to our participation in NAFTA? No, let's reverse this. NAFTA is to destabilize your economy and our economy, because we're supposed to be a global economy. We're supposed to be all on an equal basis. Now, I don't really like being on an equal basis with someone who really doesn't give it one continental darn whether the only thing they care about is something to eat and something to have sex with. Now, I'm not putting everybody in that class, but there are some folks, lots of folks, that is their lifetime's ambition. And those are the folks that we're supposed to be on equal footing with.
It was my experience under my control and working on the groundwork of NAFTA that the drug industry was supposed to help balance the economies by bringing Mexico's economy up and absolutely eroding our nations, Canada and the United States. So there's some things that are detailed in the book that definitely pertain to that aspect.
Okay, how do you know that Cathy does not have false memory planted in her? Oh, I can tell you not only how I know, but Cathy O'Brien has been scrutinized by more psychiatrists than any human being, I do believe, on the face of this earth, because they wanted to find if I had reprogrammed her. They wanted to find if she was just crawling with false memory. There are a variety of ways to determine this. And yes, and the next, will this be answered tomorrow? The most important thing about verifying whether or not somebody has false memory, in the very beginning, I was so traumatized by the material she was giving me, I developed what is known as post-traumatic stress disorder, which is very similar to being shell-shocked. I mean, this was totally out of my realm. I worked with some of these people that she's talking about. I had no idea that they had separate agendas. I didn't socialize with them, thank God. But I did understand that they had some very specific things that they were working on that coincided with some of the things that my bosses were working on, and I didn't find it anything particularly sinister in it. But I worked on a need-to-know basis. So far as the false memory thing goes, I assumed that everything was false in the beginning, and I turned it over to members of the United States Customs, to Canadian Customs, to friends of mine who are in the military, friends who have stepped forward, members of the FBI who have stepped forward, like none other than Ted Gunderson, who was third in command of the FBI, who investigated me first, by the way, and then investigated Cathy's claims. Ted Gunderson will stand before you and tell you she's 100% credible. There are others that will tell you she's credible, not because of what she says, not because of the details and her ability to remember the details, but because of the hard evidences that we've been able to get to support the claims. Now, Cathy is not the only person. If she were, I'm not that much of a bleeding heart. I would write a book and move to someplace else, and you all could read it or not read it, because that meant there was not a real big threat. But there are a lot of Cathy O'Briens out there. Most of them die by the time they hit 30. But the ones that don't, and the ones that are still in there, like the rest of her family, are the ones that we want to see some attention drawn to and this nonsense stopped. Muskegon, Michigan was Cathy's hometown. And we're getting a lot of cooperation suddenly out of the state of Michigan because they've discovered, oh, gee willikers, Muskegon is a center for some sort of government mind control experiments. Wow, what a revelation. After we've been screaming for 8 years, they have finally got somebody on their staff at the Muskegon Chronicle that got permission from the boss to work with some Michigan State child advocacy folks, and they've got a whole series that are being printed about the pedophiles and the child pornography and the child molestations and all the mental disorders of the people in that little area.
and the government involvement. So thank God we're getting a lot of validations from the big picture as well as the little evidences. So as far as the false memory aspect of it goes, you darn tootin', I want to tell you what the difference is, and I want to show you the difference and how you can tell the difference even with your own relatives. And you don't have to have 20 years spent with the CIA and 25 years worth of psych training to understand it. It's very easy to determine what's real and what isn't. I believe that wraps up our questions. It wraps up our evening. And I want to tell each and every one of you, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 6 o'clock tomorrow night. If you're a little bit late, that's fine. On stage you got jobs to do and you've got work to do. But those of you that can be here in this room at between 6 and 7 tomorrow night, you are the people that we are going to impart some information to that I believe that will change your lives. Those of you who were here tonight that we are not going to be here tomorrow night, that are skeptical, for Pete's sake, for your sakes, and for your children's sakes, and your grandchildren's sakes,
and
humanity's sake, if you really care, please look into what we're talking about. If you want to, you can borrow a book from somebody that's actually purchased one and copy the back of some of the references that are clinical, that are available in your library, and the authors sure as heck don't know who I am, because some of them have been long dead. But these are valid research articles, and these are articles that are printed about everything concerning the topic of mind control that is actually something we can actually understand and read, being non-professionals. Again, our thanks to each of you and allowing us to come to your beautiful country and to see some of you beautiful people. Please, please keep spreading the truth. We love you all.
Thank you.